Your eyeballs turn out to be amazingly interesting. The first thing that happens when light goes into your eye is that it hits a part of your eye called the lens. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the light goes through the lens, and the lens flips the light upside down, and then, if you're lucky, projects the light so that it's nice and focused on the back of your eyeball. The back of your eyeball we'll talk about a lot because there is a kind of tissue called the retina, and it has an amazing type of cell in it called photoreceptors, and those cells convert light into action potentials that your brain can understand. But the first thing I want to tell you about what's wild about the construction of your eyeball is that, as I said, the light gets flipped upside down when it goes into your lens. So you see the world upside down, right? No, you don't. You need your brain to flip it back the right way. Another fun thing that we're going to talk about actually in the last part of this series is that you have two big holes in the back of your eyes. You knew that, right? Because you can't see where there are those big holes. The part of your eye that's got these special photoreceptors in it, it covers the back of your eye. And if you're very careful, you can directly stimulate some of those receptors. And the way you can do this, and again, be very careful, and if there are any kids watching this, stop and get an adult before you progress any further. But what you can do is it turns out that the retina goes all the way to the very edge of your eyeball. So if you look away, let's say I'm going to look over to my left, and I'm going to very gently push on my eye with my lids closed, very gently push on my eye, I will see, I do see a spot of light over about here. What I'm doing when I press on my eyeball is I'm stimulating those cells, the photoreceptors. The photoreceptors know that they're being stimulated, but they don't know it's from touch. They just know that they're being stimulated. So when photoreceptors are normally stimulated, that means there's light there. So I'm seeing the pressure, the pushing motion on the photoreceptors. Crazy. What's the lens? The lens is basically our focus button. You know, on some cameras, they have autofocus. The focus is what our lenses do. It's ideally a clear thing that light can go right through, and it changes shape. So you know the old-fashioned cameras, if they had a lens, the lens had to move closer to or farther away from where the film was. Well, we don't have eyeballs like that, right? Our eyeballs don't have lenses that go in and out like Wile E. Coyote cartoons. Instead, they stay in the same place and they change shape. And if the lens, for example, gets fat, like you see in the bottom picture there, it can bend light more. There are muscles that are attached to the lens on all sides that can pull it apart or let it relax and be fat. If it's pulled apart and the lens is skinnier, then we can see farther. If the lens is fat, then we can see closer. Now, if you've ever spent any time with people who are in their late 30s, maybe early 40s, it's funny, back when we could go to restaurants, but it's funny when you go to a restaurant, they'll hold the menu, they don't have glasses, right? They'll hold the menu, not where somebody normally would read it, but really far away. What are they trying to do? What are they doing? Turns out, as you get older, your lenses get tough, and it's harder for them to change shape. So what those people are doing is trying to compensate for the fact that they have old lenses that don't change shape very easily anymore. And so they're trying to hold the menu out far enough so that they can still read it while compensating for the fact that they can't change the shape of the lens. And the changing of the shape of the lens we call accommodation. Accommodation. Some of us wear glasses or contact lenses. Why? Well, those of us who wear glasses or contact lenses have a problem between our lens and the shape of our eyeball. Now, I said before that ideally the lens projects the light in the world onto the back of your eye so that it's nicely focused onto the back of your eye. But for some of us, the lens focuses the light in front of our retina, in front of that tissue in the back of the eye, so it's focused in the middle of our eyeballs. And other people have the light clearly focused behind their eyeballs. The difference between those two is called nearsighted and farsighted. Nearsighted people have the image of the world projected not onto the retina, but in front of the retina. So what gets projected onto the retina is something that's blurry. Other people who are farsighted, the image gets projected, again, not onto the retina, but behind the retina. So where it's crisp is not where the retina is, it's behind it. What's on the retina is blurry. So why do we have to wear glasses? We wear glasses to bend the light, more or less, so that the light gets nicely focused on the retina instead of in front of it or behind it. Okay, I'm going to tell you about two aspects of common eye diseases or problems that you can have with eyes. One of them is cataracts, and cataracts is essentially a disease of the lens. What happens is your lenses start to get these proteins growing in them, and instead of your lens being nice and clear and letting all the light through, there's gunky stuff. There's these proteins build up in your eye, and the light that's normally would go right through your lens, it gets bounced off, it gets disturbed by the proteins in your lens. So on the top pictures there, you can see pictures of people who have cataracts, and on the bottom two pictures, you can see simulations of what the world looks like to people who have cataracts. Basically, it looks blurry because you can't get the light focused nicely on the back of your eyeball because it's getting hung up, if you will, in the lens. Cataracts is not a big problem because what they can do now is remove your natural lenses with proteins in them and replace your naturally and now diseased lens with an artificial lens that's perfectly clear. So not a big deal. Very common surgery. Actually, I think cataract surgery might be one of the most common surgeries that exists in the US. Another eye disease is called macular degeneration. Now, I've talked a lot about the retina. That is the tissue in the back of your eye that has these photosensitive cells that convert light into a language that your brain understands, action potential. Now, the retina has some differences, but there's sort of a sweet spot in the retina, and it's called the macula. And the macula is where, if you're looking right at me, my face is probably falling on your macula, okay? And the periphery out here is not falling on your macula, it's falling outside of your macula. Macular degeneration is when the macula starts dying. So you lose the part of your retina that allows you to see where you're looking, but you keep the part of your retina that's in the sides. So on the bottom there is a picture of an image to kind of simulate macular degeneration, in that people with macular degeneration cannot see where they're looking, but they can see around it. Wild, right? And on the right is a picture of the back of someone's eye, and those yellow spots are places where the retina or the macular region of the retina is actually dying. I've talked about the retina. Here's a cartoon of the retina. So you can see your eyeball, and the little square that's drawn on the back of your eyeball doesn't exist in your eyeball. That's just to tell you where this colored cartoon comes from. And what I want you to see is there's a lot of different types of cells. All those different types of cells, that layer of cells, that's your retina. And there are some, they're blue and yellow in this drawing. On the very back of the retina are some cells that are pointed backwards, away from your lens. That's the crazy thing about the retina. You would expect the retina to be oriented so that the receptors pointed towards where the light is coming in. You'd never design an eye where the receptors, the things that are responding to the light, are pointed towards the back of your head. But that's actually how your retina is. Your retina's backwards. Everybody's is. It's crazy. So what the light has to do to get to the cells that can translate from light to brain language or action potentials is the light has to go through all of these other cells, ganglion cells, horizontal cells, amacrine cells, bipolar cells, all of this tissue before it gets to the sensitive ends of the photoreceptors, the translating cells. You only see the light that actually reaches the ends of those cells. All of the other light that gets absorbed by these cells that aren't photoreceptors, it's all lost. Here's another picture of the retina. I want to just reinforce the idea of the center part of your retina versus a periphery or sides. So in the far left, you see a drawing of an eyeball. There's a little space in there that contains a fovea. The fovea is actually a kind of a pit in the back of your retina. The fovea is a part of the macula. The foveal pit is a place that's super concentrated with photoreceptors. The fovea is where we have our absolute best vision. And then as you go to the sides, the photoreceptors become much less dense. Turns out those photoreceptors, the translating cells, there's two types, rods and cones. The rods and cones are named after their shapes. You can see a photomicrograph of rods and cones here. Some of those cells are shaped like cylinders. Those are rods. And some of them are shaped like upside down ice cream cones. Those are cones. Rods and cones serve two different purposes. We use our cones during the daytime. When we use our cones, we can see color because cones are the type of photoreceptor that is sensitive to color. Cones also have a great deal of visual acuity. You can see fine details with cones. So we use our cones during the daytime. Rods are what allow us to see at night. Rods can't see color. They respond to grays, shades of gray, and they're located in the periphery or the sides of your eyeball. They don't have particularly good acuity. You cannot see details with rods, but what you can see is things that are just barely light. Where those rods and cones live is a great question that we'll talk about in the final segment of this series, because it turns out, did you know you are colorblind? You are.